Today, in our spookiest video yet, we're going to talk about the most terrifying thing that an EAL student must learn: how to write. All right, so I might be being a little bit dramatic, but there is a lot to cover with this topic, and it is one of the most crucial domains for EAL students that they have the most trouble with. When I taught LA, it was the domain that I probably felt the least competent with, and was one area that could make or break my students' confidence. Think about all of the times that you've had your grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes circled on papers. Capitalization is something that students struggle with well into middle school, and every time they have a capitalization error, it gets circled. Eventually that wears students down and wears down their confidence, so they feel like writing is something that is an elite skill that not everybody can do and that they can't do for sure. The good news for our learners and for our EAL students is that this monster of hyperachievement mostly lives in the teacher's head. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we think about writing, what I used to believe about writing, and how those beliefs can be changed to help your students. So definitely some things that I used to think that writing needed to be was the hardest thing to learn or teach, that it was a specialized skill that was very difficult for most people to learn. Printing must always be neat. Writing is sentences and paragraphs. Writing requires a pen or a pencil. There's a right way and a wrong way to write. Spelling has rules that cannot be broken. The goal of writing is a completed piece written independently. Now, I want you to look at this list and compare it to the last 3 things you have written. I'll wait while you think of those things. I bet if you use these strict definitions of what writing is, it means that you haven't actually written anything for months, maybe since you were last in school. The last 3 things that I've written, for example, are the speech for this video, or the script for this video, I should say, a text, and an email. I haven't followed any of the rules that we listed above for that writing, but I certainly have written those things. Knowing the real rules of writing is about to relieve a lot of stress for you and make it easier to explore writing as something that you can teach. The number 1 rule about writing is that it's expressive, just like speaking. So reading is to listening as writing is to speaking. Writing is sometimes personal, but sometimes it's for others. The goal of writing depends on the individual doing the practice of writing. In the learning phase, which could be now, maybe I'm in the learning phase of writing, it'll be messy. It won't always be done with a pen or a pencil. It won't always be in complete sentences, and it won't always be in paragraphs. Sometimes that communication might take the form of a well-organized series of sentences and paragraphs. So when I'm writing a report to send to a teacher about a WIDA that I've done or something about a student, I'm careful in the way that I phrase things, that I write things, because I know that my audience is very different than an audience who is just me. But if I'm writing a text, sometimes I don't use proper grammar. Sometimes I don't write in complete sentences. There are words and phrases that only my friends would understand. Sometimes I communicate just with an emoji, which is a drawing. Those are all forms of writing that are equally valid. And I'm using them in my adult life as somebody who has gone to university and written a ton of formal things. But that's what I write the majority of the time. Sometimes writing might be a voice memo. It might not be written down at all. And thank goodness for this. If all of writing needed to follow the structured rules that we learn in school and in a traditional language arts class, we wouldn't have poems or songs or graffiti on murals or with murals. We wouldn't have fortune cookie cards. We wouldn't have all forms of writing that are expressive without being super formal. In the context of your ELs, let's look at this helpful 4-quadrant graphic. This is based on the Commons quadrants, which you can look up if you would like, but it just basically says that in order to learn and practice new words at the A1 level, if you look at the top left domain of the quadrants, everything needs to be in context. That's why we learn social vocabulary and school vocabulary and the vocabulary of the world around us before we learn the vocabulary of physics or history. If you think about a history class, that's context removed. It's not context embedded. In order for me to learn about history, I have to read about it or watch a video or experience it somehow secondhand. I can't have hands-on real-world experience with history because it's happened before. It's not happening now. At A1.1, writing can be drawings, single letters, small words, or copied dictations from you. As the learner progresses, they may make lists, labeled pictures, post-it note messages, filled out graphic organizers, short poems, or rhymes. Dictated accounts, either recorded with technology or written by you, are really important. Writing must be accessible, and students cannot walk before they can run, or else it will be painful and discouraging. ELLs will find it easiest to access text generated from quadrants A to C. And if you notice, D is where we have most of our traditional language arts-based forms of writing. Quadrants A to C are just as valid, and they are the stepping stones to accessing D eventually. Before we go, I want to talk about pre-production and production phase students. So students will often know what they want to write before they have the skills to do so. A pre-production writer cannot yet write a whole word or sentence independently. This is why scribing is so valuable at these stages. However, they can participate in writing in the following ways. They can cut familiar songs or stories or phrases into strips and put them back in the order that they are supposed to go. Just depending on the student, you might want to cut paragraphs into sentences and they can order it back into a paragraph, or you might want to cut sentences into words and they can order the words. They can categorize parts of a sentence into separate cards, and you can allow the students to build sentences and stories from there. So think about categorizing nouns, adjectives, verbs, and having students construct sentences from those categories. A model for this, I will put on screen here. I like to use color coding and then color-coded cards. And then after the student has written their sentence, they can read it back to you. Allow students to draw and encourage the use of their first language and creative spelling. Again, a persistent myth is that if students use their first language in any way, it's somehow hindering their second language, but that's just not true. We need to use our first language that we have more of a mastery over in order to help us bridge that gap. Think about if you've ever spoken a second language or you're just learning a second language, you're speaking along fluently, you come to a word you don't know, you say it in your first language and then you move on. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing game. It can be, I have to use my first language to structure these sentences and to help me express myself. Production students are kids who are starting to use spelling patterns to produce some words and sentences independently. They're not 100% independent. Maybe they're missing some words or a lot of words, but they are writing and producing in a more traditional pen and paper kind of way. They can still benefit from all of the activities above, plus using graphic organizers like a Venn diagram to compare, or a graphic organizer that shows the beginning, middle, and end of a story can really help them along. Also, having students express orally what they want to write down before they write it down is very, very important. When I was teaching language arts, I would always have students say to me, I don't know how to write what I want to say. And I would say, well, tell me what you want to say. And 9 times out of 10, what they told me was what they should have written down. We're very lucky in English. Our oral language and our written language are closely tied together, with some exceptions in formal writing. But our students are not there yet. Our students are not going to be there in the K to 8 stage. They just need to be writing down what's in their head and expressing themselves. Students can also label wordless picture books or photos, or write dialogue for characters. In another video, I talked about the importance of reader's theater. Have students write that dialogue. Sometimes it's more productive because they have those familiar phrases already, and it can just be a casual conversation between two friends. These are familiar phrases that they're going to know, and they can write them down, and then you can have a little dialogue. For the extension activity this week, it's maybe a little bit more for you than your students, but I would encourage you to send your kids home with one of the activities or tasks that I listed above and see how that goes. So I would recommend that you send home sentences cut into individual words or into strips, and see if they can put them back together and maybe glue them on a piece of paper, take a picture of it, or have those just be their word cards that they keep all the time. Get feedback from your students. See if it helps your reluctant students do more writing in kind of a non-traditional way. Another great idea would be to send students home and get a list of all of the things in their cupboard that are in cans, or things that start with the letter A. List making in elementary in particular is really valuable, but you could easily extend that up through to middle school and high school. I hope to make a part 2 of this video, and in it I will demonstrate some of my favorite kind of rule-breaking writing activities that will hopefully increase student engagement and get them producing every time. So that's what we want. We want students to feel like they can write even if they're not writing in full polished paragraphs and sentences just yet. We're bridging that gap. We're getting them to where they need to go. So, thank you for watching. If you're watching this when it's premiering, I guess, then happy Halloween and have a great weekend. And if you're not watching it when it's premiering, then please know that wearing this hat and putting up this background made sense at the time. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me, and have a great day. Is that this monster of writing and what we think about writing lives mostly in the teacher's head and the mentor's head.
Excuse the interruption. Any staff or students that have not